Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme, exploring the genre of shoegaze. We kicked it off yesterday with some slow dive. We're going to be pushing forward today with some LSD and the search for God. What a band name. Let's dive into this then. Check out the song Starting Over. The album shares the name of the artist. This came out 2007. Let's dive in. Ooh. I would love to know how they're accomplishing that. To my ear, it sounds like string bends, but string bending an entire chord? Really big low end. There's just a nice rumble at the bottom of all of this. It really is kind of bizarre just how much space that low end takes up. I mean, that chorus was enormous, but it was really enormous at the bottom of the stack. There was room above still. Ooh, a little bit of bass movement there that wasn't in guitars. Okay, that seems to be very stereotypical shoegaze. That is what I expect out of the genre. Yesterday I was a bit surprised by what we ended up listening to. This this meets my expectations though. And by expectations, I don't mean that this is what the genre should be doing. It simply means that this is what I thought the genre did. And I mean, the fact that I had a bit of a skewed perspective on the genre entirely is the reason why I was excited to do this week. I don't have a really strong grasp on shoegaze, despite thinking that I did. So surprises like yesterday were really great. And then having something that's a bit more of what I expected right after it works really well too, because this kind of gives me a bit of width where I thought the genre was versus how far it actually can go out and expand, and what other types of sounds are still under that umbrella term. This has been a really great start to the week, pushing against what I expected and then giving me something right where I thought it was, telling me that I'm not wrong in my understanding, but it was shallow and that there's more depth than I knew. So this is great. I really love that. This is a good song, though. It's very indie rock, very one note kind of. It has nice pacing. We start out small, have a couple of peaks and valleys, and bring it back down to a very minimal sound at the end. In fact, we end pretty much where we start, too. The dual vocals, oh, that's a nice treat. I'm always down for dual vocalist. I'm down for counterpoint and passing, was it call and response going on? That was very cool. And the production on this is wild. That's a quick overview of what I picked up on this, but there's a couple of things I want to dive into specifically on this before we head into the lyrics and wrap the analysis up. The first thing is the first thing we hear, the detuning going on. There is a wild intonation element at play here where for the guitar riff, we get a little bit of consonant harmony where all the notes work well together. The wavelengths are playing off of each other in positive ways. And it really isn't that long after that when we begin to introduce negative harmony or dissonance, where the sound waves are beginning to clash and they introduce warble into the conglomerate sound we hear of all of these sound waves working together. It's just a really fancy way, I guess, of saying, there's dissonant chords going on at times that are played alongside the consonant chords, the ones that have a bit more positive structure to them. But we don't just jump back and forth between these sounds. There's also the intermediate part because there's string bends going on. There's notes that start and just slide into another note. And based on the timbre of the sounds, it doesn't sound digital, as if the sound wave were being manipulated to alter the pitch. It sounds like the physics of someone, holding a note, strumming it, and then putting more tension on it. Actually, that's backwards. They're not actually putting more tension on it because that would raise the pitch. What we need to do is drop the pitch. So actually, I think they're using a whammy bar, right? I always forget that part of a guitar exists. I'm not a big fan of whammy bars. I've only had one guitar with one, and I never installed it. Maybe I did originally just to kind of play around with it, but eventually I just removed it. And what it does is it releases tension on the bridge in the body of the guitar. The strings come down, and then there's an area underneath where they're held in place, which allows you to create the tension against where the tuning knobs are on the head of the guitar. And you're actually going to pull the metal piece up a little bit, reducing the tension, dropping the pitch of the string. So yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense now that I think about it, and I feel kind of foolish for completely forgetting that thing. It's probably a whammy bar. Coming back to the music, though, this creates something really interesting where we have the positive harmony in the stable chords, we have the negative harmony in the dissonant chords, and then we have the chords that start positive, they start stable, but then have the pitch reduced on them and kind of have this dripping feeling. And beyond just the feeling of reduction, of movement downwards, there's also the element of suspension because they're not really at rest. They're not really tense. We're just kind of waiting to see what happens. Where is it going to take us? And I really love the way that this is worked into the core of the verse. It has the typical harmony or consonant harmony and dissonant harmony, the back and forth there of rest and tension. But there's also moments where you just don't know what's going to happen and you're just waiting to see. That's very cool. You don't get that too often in rock music, and I love how it's used here. Now, there's also the side of production on this. It's fuzzy. It's very fuzzy all over the place. This is what I expect from shoegaze. Big wall of sound, lots of fuzz and distortion, and we do get a lot of that. There is a very powerful low end on this though, primarily in the verse where you can really hear this in isolation because the guitars are doing their chordal things. Listen to the bass kick and the bass guitar, and they're actually huge. They take up so much space here. And what I find really interesting is that once we shift from the verse into the chorus, the guitars join in on this. They move into the pure chords rather than playing around with chordal ideas and having space between riffs. It's just all playing all the time chord progression. And it is a massive wall of sound because it combines with the drums, it combines with the bass. But there's an openness to it too. It begins to swallow up the vocals, but doesn't. There's room at the top for the vocals to exist. And they don't take up a lot of space, so it just kind of feels semi-empty up here. It's a peculiar way of producing something in this vein. Wall of sounds are designed to take up all of the space, and this kind of leaves a 10% open at the top. I find that interesting. We do get a phasery guitar thing going on in the guitar solo during the bridge, but otherwise it's more wall of sound stuff. And honestly, the phasery sound takes up a lot of space and just kind of fills that little 10% up, and then you can feel that reduction heading into that final chorus so that the vocals have a little bit more room in there. And speaking about the vocals, I do enjoy the duality here. The timbre difference, the pitch difference, the timing difference. The verse gives us a nice call and response, a back and forth, but once we hit the chorus, that's just pure counterpoint. We have two vocal melodies going on at the same time. One delivers quite a bit more notes. I don't know what they were saying, but there's more syllables delivered here. The other one kind of drifts into a bit of a background sound, a bit ornamental, as they just kind of hold out notes. They have less syllables overall, but they do provide a nice harmonic counterpoint to it while still providing a melodic element to the song entirely. And I really love this division of roles. I think it ends up sounding really great. The call and response at the beginning gives them equal weighting, and then it divides them into specific roles to help the song push forward. But I also wonder if there might be something more to read into that. And hopefully the lyrics might push me into a direction that gives me a stronger read than just, hey, it sounds cool, which is absolutely not a bad reason to record something some way. But you know me, I like to find thematic overlap between things, so kind of hoping we might see something like that in the lyrics. Other than that, I don't have a lot to add to this one. It's fairly straightforward. It's a nice indie rock style song, a bit rawer on the production, simple composition, and a structure that has us following along nicely, provides good pacing throughout, but also sits within a very standard verse chorus, bridge chorus idea, and doesn't deviate from that at all. So, not a lot to dive into here, but there is some really cool texture and production things that are certainly worth diving into, which we did. So, let's hit some lyrics. All right, we do have two totally different perspectives here. This isn't a duet where the two vocalists and the two lyrics are telling a unified story. They're actually telling two parallel stories, which is very cool. This is something that I think music does really well. It's kind of tough to represent this in text or prose. I suppose you could have two columns of paragraphs, but that might be a little tough to read, a little claustrophobic on the page. And in film, you can certainly have a split screen idea, and many visual, film musicals have used this, particularly for duets like this. But it is something that the actors themselves can't really tell storyline wise. Can't really have two narrators doing that. It really is a visual element of the medium that benefits it. But here we have one person singing, "When I was a young girl, I knew a boy like you, threw my heart over a fence, if back then only I knew." So they were in a toxic relationship, where the other person just treated them poorly. And they kind of said, if I knew what was going to happen, I wouldn't have gotten into that. The other person sings, "When I was younger, you thought you knew me. Well, I thought I'd make it painful. If only I knew I started over." The last line of that is interesting. If only I knew I would start it over. He's talking about cycles. The first person is talking about having knowledge not to start something. The other one is having knowledge that the cycles would always be repetitive. One feels linear, one feels cyclical. But I'm curious if the two people were in a relationship together or if they're simply parallel experiences. The second verse, our first vocalist says, "There's no method in your madness, no scientific way. You're a monster given life with one foot in the grave." Doesn't really, it adds to the fact that this person seemed to thrive on being toxic in this relationship, but it doesn't really add much that we didn't already know. This was definitely a one-sided relationship, and this character needed to get out, and they see it now. The other side, though, says, "You thought I was crazy. Yeah, but never crazy for you. Hurry up, 'cause I'm leaving. One foot in the grave, you better think it over." And this begins to sound manipulative. And I think that's one thing I really like about it. It paints this person not just as a terrible person in the relationship, but one who actively tries to coax the other one through negative emotions to stick around. This is something that is seen in a lot of abusers. Even, one foot in the grave, you better think it over, I think is a great way of showing this person, kind of using the technique of saying, I'm almost dead, right? Is that really going to be good for you? He says, "Hurry up, I'm leaving." Now, this could be read in two ways: leaving the relationship, which puts the other person to come to their terms and meet them on their terms, bringing that power dynamic back to their perspective, because you're threatening them with leaving the relationship and they don't want it to end, even though they don't know that it's a bad relationship, or maybe they do deep down, they still want it to continue on. This is very common abuse tactics right here. And I think it's interesting to see them laid out so clearly and plainly in the lyrics. So this is what we have right here. Maybe two parallel stories, maybe it's two sides of the same story. I'm not sure. But it takes us to the chorus. And the first vocalist says, "In real life, I couldn't find you. In real life, let me remind you that I can't reach you when I was trying." I don't know who this is supposed to be speaking to unless it's the same you, the toxic person in the relationship, that they couldn't reach them, they couldn't find them, even though they were trying to. And maybe that's why they left eventually. But I think another way to perceive it is a different you, someone outside of this relationship, someone who would make them happy. And since they couldn't find that good relationship, that good person, they reluctantly choose this toxic relationship. The other vocalist, though, a lot more words. Doesn't matter. Gonna come back again. I'll tell you it's all over. You might want to do it again. I don't know when I take it over, but I can't reach you. Now, interestingly, on the second chorus, the first vocalist doesn't change at all, but the second one does. It says, "Are you right there? You got me in a nightmare. You never want to see me again. I want you to tell me, how do you even remember a deeper meaning? I've found some time. I want to do it again. Can you come back? We'll do it again." And this is interesting because it brings remorse into the discussion. It almost feels as if after they had separated, the first vocalist moved on. The second one didn't, created this cycle. And this is where the outro puts an interesting spin on things. It says, "Be careful what you wish for, these wise words you once said. It only takes a moment to fall in love again." And this could be read in two ways. One, it's really easy to fall in love with someone else and end a relationship. You thought you had this control over me, but eventually I got out of it, and now you're just stuck in a situation of wanting me back. But also, it's easy to fall in love again. And it is a common story among abuse victims in relationships to go back to their abusers. It only takes a moment to fall in love again. And so I think depending on whose perspective you want to read that from, it means something different to both of them. This is, while musically a bit more simple in its riffage and composition, it is very complex lyrically, and it creates this division, this friction between the two vocalists, their wants, their needs, their actions, and even the way that they perceive each other, with one wanting to express love to the other and the other one only wanting to express control over the first one. There is a massive difference between who they are and their relationship to the situation. And I think the music making them take turns and then having very different roles in the choruses really shines a light on that. I think you could even make an argument that the feminine vocals being more beautiful and, what would be a good word? Ornamental. As I mentioned, there's just a lot of long held out notes that kind of dance around the main melody of the male vocals. You can even see that as how they're trying to add beauty to the relationship, while the male vocals are just kind of there. They're a bit rough. They're very dark, and they're very focused on themselves, trying to make their line more impressive, being more dexterous, having more notes to sing, while the feminine vocals just sort of float above everything else. So you can kind of see a little bit of their personalities of these characters being represented in the performance too. It all comes together rather well to create a rather dense musical story. And I think it's something that can't really find in another medium. That's pretty cool. That's going to wrap it up though. These are my thoughts on LSD and the search for God, starting over. Oh, dude, the idea of rest, tension, and suspension. I don't really know that I found too much of that in the music. But maybe you did. These are just my thoughts. What did you think of this track? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Do you have your own perspective on things, your own take or interpretation on the song? Please put all of that and any other thoughts you have down into the comments section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC, as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.